Hello, everyone. This is Nandini Ray and your host at the Maitri podcast Between Friends Conversations with Maitri. My production team member Shilpa Sasdev and I are always happy to have all our listeners on this platform with us, where we bring different guest speakers to shed light on important issues that are critical for building healthy gender relationships. Today, we will discuss how rigid gender roles and gender stereotypes can hurt boys too. I'm happy to introduce our guest, Rajat Mittal. Rajat is a software engineer, and in his creative practice, he enjoys making creative projects that often end up taking the shape of an educational book. Rajat is passionate about making children's books. Rajat, I'm so happy that you are here. Welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me, Nandi. It's a pleasure.
Rajat, when we are creating any messaging for our children, that always carries a huge responsibility, as we know that our messaging, our messages will shape our children's perception and action. So, by creating children's book, you are carrying a huge responsibility, I would say, and I know that you publish a newsletter called Boyish, and it's really fantastic. And would you like to tell us about our listeners about Boyish and what is the purpose behind creating this newsletter?
Yeah, absolutely. Boyish, as it stands today, is essentially a collection of 12 stories or 12 essays. And through the medium of these 12 essays, Boyish is largely me reflecting on my own growing up experience as a boy.
Hmm.
First, it's a very personal take in many ways. And I sort of unpack various aspects of masculinity or masculine idea that I picked up growing up.
Hmm.
Um, and I also tell the stories of 12, like with each essay, I tell a story of one person who I believe sort of defied uh, gender norms that impact boys, right? So, an example would be that actually the first essay is about a boy who does ballet dancing, right? So, the premise or the point of view of that essay is that delicate forms of dancing is not necessarily encouraged in boys.
Yes.
And I reflect on how I sort of, my own like experiences with dancing.
Hmm.
And then I talk about Manish Chauhan, who is a up and coming ballet dancer from India.
Hmm.
So this is sort of the format and I guess the template of an essay. But yeah, it's a very interesting collection of 12 of such essays.
Okay, so you are basically trying to share your life story, your journey, and your thoughts with your audience, right?
Yes, yes, certainly. I mean, I think like the purpose behind Boyish was largely to reflect on my own upbringing as well.
Hmm.
I have a son now; he's almost 3,
Hmm.
and that was a big sort of catalyst for me to at least reflect on the kind of things that you know
Hmm.
uh, impacted me, could impact him potentially. So I think the writing process for Boyish was very therapeutic in a way because it allowed me to shed a good amount of my own conditioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, we see at our work, we see that men are oftentimes absent from participating in events and projects or related to gender issues, and most men they're uncomfortable talking about, even if they see gender stereotypes or gender discrimination. Yes, society is changing, but still I see a lot of gaps, like people, especially men, they are not very comfortable, and but we need to recognize the fact that strict gender norms and gender inequality harm all genders. It's not just, it's harming only women. And so thank you, Rajat, for raising awareness on this issue, for talking about this issue, for sharing your personal journey, that what how you felt that gender stereotypes and gender norms, strict gender roles, can harm boys. So, and I hope that your work will motivate more men and boys to think about how they can break gender barriers, gender norms. And sometimes it's suffocating for them, but they don't know how to talk about it, because it is a cultural training probably that we don't talk, men don't talk.
Mhm.
And I personally think that in South Asian culture, there is a high value attached with strict gender roles and gender expectations, and sometimes it is obvious, and sometimes it is not so obvious. But gender abuse and discrimination is there, and it gets so normalized that we don't even recognize that it is a as a flaw in our culture, and we don't as so that we don't and we just avoid talking about it. And I can give you many examples, that I was, other day I was watching an interview of Indra Nooyi, and she said that the night she became the Pepsi co-CEO, president, she came home late night to share the good news enthusiastically with her family, and her mom said that the office good news can wait. First, go get some milk, because next morning your kids need milk. So Indra asked her mom that why didn't she ask Indra's husband, who came home much earlier in the evening. And her mom said, oh, he came from work and he was tired. So, it is so normal in our culture that we don't even pay attention. We don't even notice that. But I'm also very curious to know about your thoughts on this. Like, do you also think that gender discrimination and gender abuse gets so normalized in our culture that we don't even pay attention? We don't identify them as flaws. And, you can share some examples.
Yeah, no, well said, Nandini. And it's interesting because the thing that is not happening yet is this idea that men necessarily don't involve themselves in gender issues, right? And I think a part of that, I mean, obviously it's a very complex topic, but a part of that is coming from this idea that like gender is impacting only women, or gender is impacting other genders, and it's not necessarily impacting us or men.
Hmm.
I believe that's not true.
Hmm.
It is certainly impacting men. One could argue if it's impacting other genders more than men, but I continue to believe that it impacts everyone.
Hmm.
It's a common experience that we all share as humans, so it's bound to impact everyone. Uh,
So give us some example where you saw that it is, so normalized, get so normalized. No, no, it is discrimination, it is abuse, but people, they don't feel that it is abuse. That they just forget about it. That's the way I shared one story. I was laughing when I was, reading, I mean, hearing, watching that interview. I was thinking it's so normal, and at our each home you see, you will find this kind of examples, and
right.
we don't even pay attention. So, can you share anything that it clicked, that to you, that yes, it is actually a discrimination or abuse, but we don't pay attention?
Let me share a couple from my own life, first of
Yeah,
all.
sure, sure.
Like so, like every, and this is reflected in my writings in Boyish as well, but throughout my lifetime, there have been many moments where whenever I've tried to approach sort of like a creative side of me, right? I've always been pulled back, or I've always been shooed away in some sense, because the reality is, like, for a lot of boys and for a lot of men, if you cannot attach an activity to a financial outcome of sorts, then it's like, what's the point, right? So, for me, for instance, I was really good at dancing, or I had a lot of interest in dance, right, as a boy. And all the way up until 10 to 12 years old, I was like actively dancing on stage. I was participating in cultural events and whatnot. And then something happened where I just stopped, and I think like even till this day, I am unable to overcome that. And when I reflect and I understand what happened was, I basically got fed this idea that, you know, this is for women, and or even worse, that this is just a leisurely activity, and go use your time at other far more valuable things, right? Uh, it is only now that I'm starting to see the flaws in that ideology. Uh, so that's one example. There are just so many of them, right? Like as a skinny person, I have been sort of bullied in multiple times of my life, for having a skinny frame as a boy, because men are supposed to be more masculine and sort of like bulky and strong and big, uh, which sure is a segment of men, but that's not necessarily all the men, right? Or rather, it should not necessarily be all the men. Uh, so I find all these things very intriguing. Uh, and you're right, like in the example that you cited as well, right? That's a clear example of within the household, uh, men sort of having this privilege of not being even seen as people who can participate, right? Uh, and that sort of like impacts all the other members of the family. So they're just like all these examples are in some sense everywhere for us. Uh, and my whole like goal with Boyish is to be honest with the ones that have impacted me, and hopefully they resonate with others as well.
No, I mean, yeah, we all notice gender stereotype or gender role that is harmful, that are harmful, but we don't know probably how to start the conversation. We don't know how to point that discrimination, and it's kind of uh, I don't know. It's a very people don't necessarily notice that, and even if they notice that, they don't know that if it is worth to talk about it. But it is very much worth. I mean, it is very important to talk about this issue. Otherwise, we won't be able to find any solution, and we will have this kind of culture over and over for next 500 generations. And it is very much all of us need to understand that unless we talk about it, unless we do something about it, uh, we cannot bring any change. So talking about, like, in your uh, when you were talking, you just touched toxic masculinity, and yeah, about having big stout figure, and men should be bold and dominating and aggressive. That's a perception we have, and it's not actually the necessarily all men are like that, but some like for example, I can share a personal story. I have a son who is 16-year-old, and he is very skinny, and he was telling me that, mama, probably, and how to get a manly body. I said, you have a manly body. But he said, no, I don't think I have a manly body. So he must have seen something, or probably somebody told something to him that he doesn't look manly. And it's obviously painful for him, but I don't know how we can do something to change the perception that man can be a man without having a big body, or being aggressive, or dominating, and it's not actually a good idea to be dominating and aggressive for anyone, man or male or female.
Mhm.
So, did you notice any toxic masculinity, messaging or activity around you, or where you, do you have any memories of it, so that you now you reflect on upon it and you think that it's really painful and I didn't want that, and I will do something to break that mindset, or have you started doing anything?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I see where where your son, why your son might be feeling that, right? Like, I think
Hmm.
part of my growing experience was very similar. In fact, for a very long time, I carried the nickname of Shikhandi, which, if you know, like historically, is was this androgynous character in our history and mythology, and that was honestly what quite painful, right? Because I was uh, repeatedly sort of ridiculed and bullied about sort of my physical appearance. Uh, I think before we get to how do we solve all these issues, the only
Hmm.
thing we can do is be honest and open about that, hey, there's a problem here, right? And I think like more people need to, especially like when it comes to, so when it comes to men, I feel men need can do a better job at speaking out about gender norms that impact them, right? This whole idea of I'm going to be silent about it and be manly about it is not necessarily helping.
Hmm.
And finally, I think at the end of the day, for me, I I believe like a lot of like growing up masculinity experience is largely just almost 80 to 90% of it is just a show.
Hmm.
There's roughly about, at least in my experience, there was roughly about 10 to 20% of it which was authentic, in
Hmm.
which I as a boy wanted to perhaps dance. I sort of wrote poetry for a few years, and I had to sort of cut down that authentic part to portray or to fit into the remainder, and that can only go on for so long, right? Like, I don't think you can really uh, like push down your authentic self for far too long,
Hmm.
and it is much better to embrace it for us. And part of the reason why I think like I decided to show some of these characters and tell the lives, sort of the backstory of these characters in Boyish, is because of that. Because when you see role models, when you see people who now the world largely believes uh, are are good human beings, are doing good things, and when you see their start, and when you see, when you find them, when you find in their stories your own personal life, I think
Hmm.
something shifts in you, right? And that I feel could be extremely powerful.
Hmm. No, you're right. I mean, unless all of us do something, and all of us take part in that, to bringing change, we cannot create a just society for all genders. And unless we have several conversations, share ideas, identify our own biases, and talking about it openly on a public forum, so we cannot make any progress. So I'm really glad that we are having this conversation today at this platform, and hopefully our listeners who will, listen to this podcast, they will also reflect upon their own biases and their own thought process, and they will think that, some ideas attached to masculinity are really toxic, and we can easily discard those ideas, those um, that are attached to, if you are a man you cannot cry, if you are a man you have to be very aggressive, if you are a man you have to do ABC. So I don't know that when the day will come where all men will talking will be talking about their own feelings openly, and the the more the better, the sooner the better. But I don't know. I hopefully people will come and talk about it, and people will say that, hey, I'm not feeling, especially men, they will say that, oh, I'm not feeling good about doing this, what society has prescribed for me to do, and but I think we can change that. So, if and some people, they are not very comfortable coming out when they think that people will ridicule them. If they talk about it, people will ridicule them. So if a bunch of, if so more people, a lot of people are talking about these issues, then it will be a norm. It will be, again, we can change the norm, we can change the culture, and then that day will be, you know more I don't know, more beautiful probably for all of us. And so it's, we are, at least we are trying our best. So would you please share some tips on what everybody can do to create a culture where all genders feel equal?
So before I go to the tips part, I will say that I do believe that the narrative is shifting, and sure, it's always sort of a ongoing problem of sorts or a battle, but like just in my lifetime, right? Like things that were very okay or normalized back when I was growing up, uh, things like bullying, ragging, a lot of those issues have become less apparent now,
Yes, yes,
right?
yes.
So I am in the optimistic camp that things are progressing.
Hmm.
uh, so the argument in my mind is like, can we increase the pace of this progress, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what areas of progress should this span into,
Hmm.
right? uh, the other part about what the sort of tips of sorts, what we can do to get there. I think, like, in picking off a word from what you mentioned, my biggest tip would be essentially to sit down with that shame, and because the only way to overcome, because a lot of times, as you said, right, like we don't speak about them because we have shame.
Hmm.
And at least for me, what worked was really sitting down with that shame and understanding that, am I still shameful about it?
Hmm.
And at least for me, there came a point where I was no longer shameful about it, right? So I can openly talk about years of like my life, and I was like nicknamed something that I did not like, without feeling ashamed of it anymore, you know. And at least in my personal journey, that's been incredibly empowering. And I believe not only does it empower me, it also empowers the people around me, in many ways.
Hmm.
So my biggest tip there is like, whatever it is in an individual's life, which they feel shame is attached to, it becomes incredibly important to sit with that and understand if that shame is sort of worth addressing or worth sort of like letting go, right? And in most scenarios, I think it will be worth letting go.
Hmm.
Uh, the beauty of our time and the era in which we live now is, you're never sort of alone. So there's no, like, you can always find, like, once again, like, people who have done similar things which you perhaps might feel ashamed of, and sort of society accepting them, right? So with internet, that information is out there. So if you're like a boy like intrigued by belly dancing and you're like feeling ashamed about it, uh, spending some time, you can easily pull up examples of men who have done it well and who are like accepted and celebrated now,
Hmm.
right? And I think that is an actually important way to sort of let go of shame,
Hmm.
sort of a handy tool.
And when at our work, we work, we help survivors of domestic violence at Maitri. So we always tell our clients that if someone is abusing you or someone has abused you, that is not your fault. That should be the perpetrator's fault.
Mhm.
And shame, that is, you didn't do anything. So why you are ashamed of and why you feel so guilty? It's not your fault. And at the same time, if someone is bullying some men for being, for dancing well or for being creative or in showing more feminine qualities, then it is not their fault. They are showing beautiful traits, so it's not their fault. Who are abusing, who are bullying, it's bully's fault.
Mhm.
And that's the thing that we all of us we need to think seriously, deeply, what can be done, what we can do, how to be good role models for our children, probably, so that they feel comfortable showing their beautiful traits, and they feel comfortable, saying that, it's okay to be to dance, or it's okay to knit. Other day I was watching my son's friend, who's a boy and beautifully stitching embroidery and knitting thing, and I was so proud of that boy,
Right.
and he's so proudly doing that. So you're right, Rajat. We have to be optimistic, and we optimist, and we have to you know hope for the best, a better future. And for that, we must do a lot of discussion like that to raise awareness, because I believe that many people, they don't know actually the issues, and they're not paying attention, probably that's why they're not taking part in bringing the change. So the more they will listen to this kind of discussion or read like boyish newsletter, and they will start thinking that, oh, okay, so what my action is not right, or my thought process is not right. There is an opportunity to change. So yeah, we have to do our work. And at home also, like you said, you are creating space for your boy, your son, and I'm sure that you will help him, or you will support him if he wants to dance. So yeah, so I'm hopeful that who are listening, the boys and dads and uncles who are listening, and they will start thinking that what they can do to bring the change, to remove toxic masculinity, and to build healthy masculinity. And what is that? What does it look like? So do you have and it's all our responsibility. We can start at our own home,
Right.
then we can go to our neighborhood, right?
For sure.
So yeah, I am doing what I can do for my two boys, and you are doing for your boy, your son. And so yeah, we will do for whatever we can do for our children, and hopefully we will see a better future. So do you want to share any message for young boys in the community?
I think for young boys right now, this is a critical time, right? Like,
Yeah, they want to fit in. Probably they want
right.
to, they see that kid. I mean, their friends are saying something, doing something. They want to do it without any proper
Totally,
thinking. Yeah,
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is a critical time because in some way, my perception is that even the role models are changing. The role model of what a boy should aspire to is sort of getting. We are in the midst of like changing that heavily, right? Like,
Mm,
so like when I was growing up, there was just so much focus on sort of IQ, right? Like the role models have more IQ and EQ can take a seat. right? And we would attribute financial, social, and in some sense political power as like good signals of a masculine human, right? Uh, but I feel that's shifting, right? Like, sure, money or the breadwinning ability still dominates, but I, I am I'm in the camp who believes that the ideal role model for boys today has shifted, right? Like, or has moved from being too far on that spectrum where you just had to like uh, put blinders on and focus on money and power, and that's a good thing. That's a really really good thing. My only sort of a message of sorts is keep exploring in who your role model is, rather than ascribe or subscribe to what you might see more often, right? Because if you're like into poetry, I'm sure you can find your role model. If you're into like knitting, I'm sure you can find your role model there as well. So there's no need to like, and I know it's easier said than done. It's extremely hard, but there's no need to sort of assume that you can claim manhood only by going into, uh, focusing extremely on the IQ aspect, or by going into finance, or whatever that might be, whatever might be the dominant story there.
Hmm. Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking time and from your busy schedule and coming to our show and sharing your work, your personal story, life experience with us. And I really enjoyed having this conversation. And I'm sure today's episode will compel many men out there to think deeply if they have any gender biases, if they are, under pressure to follow gender stereotypes. And if they are seeing that gender stereotypes are perpetuated by their family members or friends consciously or unconsciously,
Mhm.
and if they're suffering, suffocating from strict gender norms. So, thank you for having this conversation today.
Thank you for
Um,
having me. I enjoyed our chat here, so thank you so much.
yeah, thank you. So, I urge all our listeners to continue this discussion with your friends and family and ask them if they are noticing any overt and covert gender discrimination, gender stereotypes, and abuse around them, and um, what they can do in preventing those stereotypes and abuse. We must, talk on this issue if we want to find solutions. So I'm sure our listeners will have some conversation with their friends and family. Thank you all for listening to the Maitri podcast Between Friends Conversations with Maitri. Please like and share our podcast with your networks. This is our third season going on. Hope you didn't miss our previous seasons. If you have already, then you can find all our episodes on SoundCloud and on other different podcast apps. It's called Maitri Between Friends. In each of our podcasts, you will find human stories, important information, and hope for a better future. I'm your host, Nandini Ray, signing off today. We will soon meet with you with a new episode. Till then, stay safe and stay happy. Thank you. This project was made possible by funding provided by Santa Clara County Office of Gender-Based Violence Prevention.
This show is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as legal advice. Always consult an attorney for legal advice. Views expressed by guests of the radio show are individual opinions and not endorsed by Maitri.
Maitri is a free, confidential, non-profit organization based in the San Francisco Bay Area that helps families and individuals facing domestic violence. Don't suffer in silence. Call Maitri Helpline 1-888-8 Maitri, Maitri. Visit our website maitri.org.